I'm a 21-year-old male, and this experience happened last summer while I was on vacation at Myrtle Beach with my family. We were staying in a resort right on the beach, on the 13th or 14th floor in a timeshare. One night, I was feeling restless and having a hard time falling asleep. At around 3 a.m., I decided to go out on the balcony to get some air. I stepped out and was stunned by the beauty of the full moon and the moonlight on the water. The beach was completely empty as far as I could see, and I had never seen it like that before. Since I couldn't sleep, I thought I might as well head down, take a stroll, and listen to some music to relax. Hopefully, when I returned, I'd be able to get some sleep. It was really unsafe and dumb of me, but since it was 3 a.m. and the rest of my family was asleep, I decided to head down without letting anyone know I was going. I thought I'd just go and chill there for 15 minutes and then come right back up. At the base of the timeshare, there was an area with a pool, an outdoor bar, and 2 boardwalks separated by about 100 feet, both leading to the beach. On the sides of the boardwalks, there were swaths of tall grass separating the ocean and the resort. When I got down to the base, the entire area was completely deserted, and I started walking down the boardwalk on the right towards the beach. As I walked down, I suddenly saw someone approaching me from the beach. This was strange because I had a pretty clear view of this same area from the balcony just before and had seen no one. I started to get a bit nervous as I saw this figure approach. As I got closer, I saw it was a man, maybe in his late 30s, who had a backpack on and was wearing glasses with large square lenses. As he got closer, I got a clearer look at him as the boardwalk was sort of illuminated by lights from the outdoor bar. He looked very on edge and alert, almost like he was trying to find someone. His clothes were somewhat tattered. We made eye contact. I nodded at him, and he passed by. I was creeped out because, honest to God, he had a sort of Jeffrey Dahmer look. Maybe it was the glasses, but he just didn't seem like he actually belonged to the timeshare. I shook it off, kept walking down to the beach, and put my headphones in. As I got down to the beach, I turned right and started walking parallel to the water, just taking in the scenery. I was barefoot and decided it would be nice to walk along the shoreline, so I moved closer to the water and continued walking. I was walking for no longer than a minute before I got a really strange feeling that something was wrong. I took off my headphones and turned around. I saw a dark figure trailing me, just upshore, situated between me and the timeshare. I immediately could tell from the figure's height, body type, and demeanor that it was the same man I had passed on the boardwalk. At this point, I started to panic as every horror story I've read rushed into my head. At the same time, I tried to rationalize it because it felt too surreal that I might actually be in a dangerous situation. I reminded myself it could just be a coincidence, and the man decided he also wanted to take a walk on the beach and just happened to be headed in the same direction as me. I took some breaths, turned my head back to the ocean, and continued walking in the same direction. After a couple of seconds, I turned my head back again and saw that now he was much closer to me. He was not walking parallel to me but was definitely walking towards me. I picked up my walking speed, turned my head back around, and saw he was matching my faster pace and still walking towards me. In the water, still, for some reason, I thought, okay, maybe he also wants to walk by the water. There's no way I'm actually being followed by a creepy man on a deserted beach. So at this point, to truly test it, I did a 180 and completely changed directions. As I turned my head, I saw him completely change directions with me and continue closing the distance, now power walking. It suddenly hit me that I was in a really bad situation. I took off running along the water, and he started running as well, but stayed upshore of me so that if I tried to run up towards the boardwalk, he would intercept me. I was freaking out and just kept running with no plan, figuring that since I'm 20 and sort of fit, I should probably be able to keep running along the water and outrun him. Then I could find some other exit off the beach and either call my family or head back to the timeshare on the road. I kept running, but he was keeping up with me. This went on for what felt like 10 to 15 minutes. The scariest part of all this, which I wouldn't have thought of, is that it was completely dead silent. All I heard was my breath and feet on the sand. When I turned, I only saw his shadowy figure upshore keeping pace with me. Suddenly, up ahead in the sand, I saw a small blue light and what looked like 4 people on the beach with a blanket. They were a bit upshore. I turned and looked at the figure and bet that even though they were upshore, I could beat into these people. So I started sprinting towards them with hopes of quickly telling them what was going on so we could all confront him. I really used up my energy sprinting towards them, and as I approached, my heart dropped. What I saw were 4 guys on a blanket with 3 or 4 handles of hard liquor surrounding them. 3 of the handles were empty, and the 4th was about half empty. 3 of the guys were completely passed out on the blankets, and the last was half sat up, obviously beyond shit-faced, with a sort of party hat on that had blue lights on it. He was talking, looking to himself, his eyes were half closed, and he didn't even register me approaching even though now I was no more than 5 feet away. I turned and saw the figure had slowed down and was observing me. Then I saw he made sense of the group state and suddenly started sprinting at me. As he got closer, the half-passed out guy's blue light illuminated him, and I could clearly see it was the same guy as before. I made eye contact with him. He was eyed and looked almost manic, barreling at me at full sprint. At this point, I decided I had to do something decisive. I had underestimated his fitness, and since I had just sprinted towards this group and exhausted myself, I was afraid that he might actually be able to catch up to me if we just continued running along the beach indefinitely. Who knows what would happen then? So instead of turning around and running, I suddenly sprinted towards him and to the right, which I don't think he was expecting at all. I caught him off balance and ran past him, full sprinting back to the timeshare without even looking back. All the hairs on my neck were standing, and it felt like a dream where you're barely evading someone, but he's right about to catch you. The adrenaline was crazy. I kept running and started to see the timeshare. I finally turned around to see how close he was, and I saw him in the distance, maybe 400 feet away. He had lost a lot of distance on me. I didn't waste any time and sprinted up the boardwalk towards the base of the timeshare. I jammed the elevator buttons, leaped in, and started mashing the closed door button as I gasped for air. The door closed, and I hit the button for my floor. When the elevator reached, I literally sprinted back to my room, opened the door, entered, and then slammed the door and double-locked it. I was breathing heavily, and I dropped to the floor and just sat there for a minute, not believing what had just happened. I crouched and crawled over to my room as I was literally afraid he might be able to see me through the window on our balcony. I entered my room. Let's just say I definitely wasn't able to sleep after that. And I were 19. At the risk of sounding pretentious, the 2 of us come from well-off North Jersey families and get to enjoy our summers down the Jersey Shore. My house is in Belmar, New Jersey, and his is in Lavallette. It was a random summer night during the week, and Alex was driving the 2 of us from my house in Belmar down to Lavallette, about an hour's drive. To be completely honest, I preferred hanging out at Alex's house not only because it was a little nicer but because the general vibe of Lavallette is more geared towards kids our age. If we weren't scouring the area for a party, we could enjoy some drinks on one of the many private beaches we technically weren't supposed to be on. I could go on and on about things to do down the shore, but for the sake of brevity, I'll try my best to get to the point. As we were driving down, we agreed that we opt for a quieter night. No partying, links, or anything that we might normally do. The two of us agreed to snag a few beers, roll a joint, and chill on one of the private beaches under the stars. Honestly, it sounded great. The two of us had been going pretty hard with some of our other friends. A break from partying was much needed. To anyone unfamiliar with the layout of Lavalette, there's a beach side and a bay side. Most of the beaches feature a really high dune and a steep drop-off as you approach the ocean. If you were to stand at the ocean's edge and look back, you'd see a pretty sizable hill of sand. After drinking a few drinks at Alex's place, we snagged some bikes from his garage and made our way toward the beach of our choice. For whatever reason, Alex insisted on journeying further than I'd ever been, which I didn't quite understand since all the beaches were basically the same. I really didn't mind a longer bike ride, though, so I just went with it. Eventually, Alex decided on a desolate-looking beach at the end of the road with no cars parked on it. Every house on the street had its lights off. I actually preferred this. This was back when weed was illegal in New Jersey, and we weren't too keen on getting caught. Plus, we did have some drinks with us despite the fact that we were only 19. We hid our bikes under some shrubs, then made our way toward the beach. The two of us lit our joint and smoked under the stars, the only sound being the light waves of the ocean and the accompanying wind. The beach stretched on endlessly in both directions, and the sand felt cool underneath our feet. The two of us got progressively drunker while we filled the air with laughter and conversation. Eventually, we just laid back in the sand, watching a sky full of stars in hopes of witnessing a shooting star. That's when we heard it. I heard it first. It was almost undetectable. The sound was like a metallic buzzing, sort of like the sound you'd hear in a massive gymnasium with large overhead lights. I really can't describe the sound any better. It was a faint metallic buzz that couldn't possibly be anything caused by at the beach. I sat up and stared at Alex, and I could tell the moment he started to hear it too. The two of us whipped our heads in every direction, looking into the darkness for the source of the drone. Strangely, it was difficult to pin down exactly where the sound was coming from. It was just too faint to tell. We were beginning to get freaked out, but were too terrified to move. We assumed that whatever was making that noise would go away and we wouldn't have to worry about it. There was literally no way we could be seen from our spot on that beach. It was way too dark, and the sound of the ocean definitely drowned out any sounds we had been making. I know it doesn't exactly sound scary, but I'd be lying if I said my heart wasn't pounding out of my chest. The drone continued on, and after another few minutes, Alex gestured for me to follow him. I nodded my head in agreement. Leaving was definitely the best option. Just like a scene from a movie, the exact second the two of us stood up, the droning went from a 1 to a 5. It took every ounce of self-control I had to resist the urge to yell in fear. It wasn't a gradual shift. The sound literally increased in a split second, and it was definitely coming from our right. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a wave of fear washed over me, tensing my body from head to toe. We stared into the darkness and still didn't see anything, but now the drone sounded so close to us that we instinctively started running toward the sand dune. I didn't even know what we were running from. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong and there was someone or something after us. As we were about halfway to the dune, I felt Alex place a firm hand on my shoulder, abruptly stopping me from continuing to run. At first, I was confused, but then I saw what his gaze was fixated on. I glanced up toward the dune and saw it. There was a dark figure standing motionlessly at the peak of the dune. Its arms were freakishly long, almost reaching its knees. It was ridiculously tall, and I was shocked at how it managed to stand so still. It was truly terrifying. Alex shouted at me, breaking my gaze from the figure, and we continued running, this time parallel to the beach. We ran to the next dune entrance and sprinted up the slope. As we made our way to the peak, we looked back at where we had just come from. I can still remember the terrifying sight that followed. Not only was the dark figure still on the dune, but there were maybe 3 or 4 more standing motionless on the slope. Each one looked like they were facing us. We didn't have time to go back for our bikes, instead opting to run the entire way home. The next morning, we retraced our steps but couldn't, for the lives of us, find those bikes. Maybe they had been stolen, or maybe whoever or whatever was stalking us the night before had something to do with it. Either way, I've never experienced anything scarier on a beach and still have trouble explaining most of these events. The weirdest thing for me is that I was never able to determine what the buzzing drone was, and to this day, have not heard anything even remotely close to it. Beaches have always terrified me, well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house, or if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles's beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. This all happened in July 2004. I was 12 at the time, and my parents brought me to Kona, Hawaii. Needless to say, it was an amazing time and just about the last place you'd expect something creepy to happen. That is, until the second to last night there. My parents and I were tossing around a ball in the ocean when I overthrew my dad, and a kid my age caught it. We invited him to join in, and after a while, my parents got tired and went back to the beach while he and I continued playing. A woman who appeared to be his mother was walking around taking pictures of us over and over, and when my mom tried to start a conversation with her, the woman completely ignored her. It turned out Jason lived in Los Angeles and was headed back tomorrow, just as we were. We were connecting through LAX, and thank God we didn't share a flight. Once it got dark, we went back to the beach and didn't see Jason's mother anywhere. After searching all over the beach, we headed back to the hotel. To clarify, the hotel was directly behind the beach with a pool and bar in between. You could vaguely see the beach through palm trees, depending on the floor, but certainly not your child. We took Jason up to his room to see if his mother was there, and he said hello to a man on the way up as if he knew him. My mom asked if the man was his dad, and he said no, as his father had run off 5 months after he was born. We knocked on the hotel doors several times and could hear the TV on, but no one answered. We were all hungry, so we went down to the lobby to use the phone. Jason called up to his room and left a message that we were going to the downstairs restaurant to eat. We had buffalo wings and soda and talked about SpongeBob, etc. He seemed like any other kid. It was a bit strange, though, when we were in the ocean and lost one of our floats. He went swimming after it way too far, and my dad called him to come back. Otherwise, who knows how far he'd have chased it and possibly drowned. Now, it had been at least 3 hours since we saw any sign of his mother until we headed back up to the lobby. She was there by the concierge, screaming at us that she had called the police. Knowing how crazy this was, my dad called them as well. They arrived rather quickly, and we told our story, all the while Jason's mother was shouting, "You're just trash," at us repeatedly. I don't recall Jason saying much of anything. Eventually, the situation died down, and we went back to our rooms, placing a desk in front of the door. Fortunately, we didn't run into them on the way back. When I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old, this was in the mid-1990s. We took a family trip to the beach in Florida. We were staying in a beach house a short walking distance from the beach. One day, we went to the beach, and I was supposed to stay in sight of my mom, but I wandered away, and before I knew it, I was lost. A lot of the houses looked the same, and I wasn't sure which one was ours. Plus, I couldn't see my mom anywhere. It started to rain. I came to a path that I was pretty sure led back to our house. Only it didn't lead to a house at all, but instead to a parking lot. There was a big, dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle around. I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair, a hot pink tank top, and those big, clunky, thick glasses that were popular in the 80s waving and smiling at me from the passenger seat of the van. She said something like, "Oh my, it's raining. Where's your mommy? Let us take you to her. It's dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could get struck by lightning." She was very friendly, almost overly so. In the driver's seat was a very overweight man without a shirt on, a hairy gray chest, and some clunky-looking gold chain. He was wearing yellow-tinted Elvis shades and staring at me intently. He was also smoking a cigarette, which I knew was bad. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down to me. She asked how old I was. When I told her, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We've got movies, Nintendo, and in the morning we've got all types." Until I was about 25, I lived in a beach town. My specific neighborhood was about a 20-minute walk from the beach. I'd say about 80% of my personality was beach-related. I've been surfing longer than I've been able to speak, and it would be an anomaly for me to shake out a pair of shoes and not have some amount of sand fall out. My 2 best friends, let's call them Tom and David, were extroverted, outgoing, and charismatic. We were all 18 and very much obsessed with girls. It was a Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before school let out. Senioritis had long since set in, and at this point, my friends and I regularly pushed the limits of how much we could get away with without getting in trouble. We already had our college acceptances, so we didn't really care much about high school anymore. Tom and I had plans to meet up with 2 girls from our high school that we'd been getting along with really well. The plan was to pick the 2 of them up in the evening and enjoy a cool, breezy night on the beach. We had blankets and a few bottles of wine, the perfect combination for stargazing on the beach. I don't condone drinking and driving in any capacity, but I was just a stupid kid. I arrived at Lisa's house just after 9 o'clock. Her and Victoria sort of danced to the car. It was clear that they had a little something to drink beforehand. Tom night. I took a scenic route to a scenic beach. It was about a 30-minute drive. The whole time, the 4 of us were having a great time in the car, cracking jokes and talking about some mutual friends. At one point, Victoria and I were having a very deep philosophical conversation about the nature of time and death and such. We were all very much enjoying each other's company. The specific beach I had chosen had a dirt path that you could drive a car up. From there was a more narrow sand path that we would walk. The path was actually pretty steep, but I had picked it because we were less likely to encounter any other people at such a secluded spot. Furthermore, This beach was further away from the main boardwalk, so the sky would be clearer for stargazing. I thought of everything. I parked my car as far up the dirt road as possible, and the four of us hopped out. Tom and I carried the blankets and wine. I'll fast forward through the boring stuff. After a few hours and an empty bottle, Tom and I found ourselves separating. He and Victoria walked up the beach, and Lisa and I walked in the opposite direction. After being separated by a decent amount of distance and darkness, I threw my blanket down, and we drunkenly fell asleep on top of it. Before anything happened, Lisa tensed up. At first, I thought it was something that I had done, but then she whispered something. "Do you hear that?" I focused my attention and strained my ears, trying to hear something other than the gentle crashing of ocean waves. I assumed she was just drunk, but then to my surprise, I did hear something. It sounded almost like a whirring, like the sound a small engine would make. The sound seemed to be moving around. I couldn't pin down where it was even coming from, then it seemed to fade away into nothingness. "It's nothing," I assured her, eager to resume what we had been doing, and that's what we did. Soon after, I fished my shirt from the sand and shook it out before throwing it over my head. Just then, Lisa, who was still lying on the blanket, shrieked. I whipped around to look at her and saw she was pointing up at something. I looked up but couldn't see anything besides the blackness of the sky. I sat down next to her to get a better angle, and I was horrified. From her point of view, the moon was perfectly aligned with what appeared to be a drone floating directly overhead. It hovered a little while longer before zipping up into the dark sky and disappearing out of sight. It all made sense. That noise that we had heard before was 100% the drone. I got angry at myself for not realizing at the time. I then got sick at the thought of being watched that entire time. I glanced over at Lisa and could tell she had the same exact feeling. She put her head in her hands and started crying. I consoled her as best I could before suggesting we walk back to the car. The two of us made it to the car to find Tom and Victoria already there. I quickly explained the situation. The two of them were dumbfounded, and I could feel the joy in the air literally being sucked out. I began driving in silence in the direction of Lisa's house, eventually trying to lighten the mood with some conversation. It didn't work, though. The girls agreed that they didn't feel safe going home just yet. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I asked if we could hang out at either of their houses. They both shook their heads, saying their parents wouldn't allow it. My house was off the table for the same reason, as was Tom's. I decided to ask Tom to call up David, which he did. David's house was massive, and his parents were super chill. It was honestly the perfect spot. To our delight, David was free. I pulled into David's driveway and parked the car. Tom and the two girls began making their way towards David's front door, and I told them I'd catch up to them in a second. I needed a second to think about everything that had just happened. I was more shaken up than I was letting on, so I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes in an attempt to calm down a bit. Honestly, those few seconds with my eyes closed really helped. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, which I hadn't even touched since the incident. The screen lit up, and I stared at the single notification that sat on the display. I had to blink a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My entire body froze as I stared in horror at the lone notification, AirTag found moving with you. Every emotion that I had just expelled from my body came crashing back. We were literally being tracked. I snapped out of my paralysis and jumped out of the car, examining every inch of the vehicle. Nothing on the front bumper, nothing in the grille, and nothing on the back. I started getting desperate, checking the seats and flipping floor mats. Still nothing. By now, sweat was pouring down my neck, and I could feel the hairs on my arms and legs clamping up. I got on my hands and knees and began examining the underside of my car. I got to the tire on the driver's side and began feeling around the tire well, and there it was. It was literally taped to the underside of the well, impossible to find if you didn't know what you were looking for. I held the tag in my hand for a few seconds before throwing it to the ground and smashing it to pieces. Whoever had watched us on the beach with that drone knew where we were. I didn't feel safe in David's driveway all alone. I picked up one of the broken AirTag pieces and ran over to David's front door. I told everyone what I had discovered, showing them the AirTag pieces to prove it. They were even more horrified than I was, especially the girls. They checked their phones and saw the same notification. David was particularly pissed off because we had been potentially tracked back to his house. After the panic subsided, we spent the rest of the night in David's basement and ended up sleeping over. A couple of weeks passed, and nothing happened. Honestly, my friends and I were glad to forget about the whole thing, assuming it was entirely in the past. The only way we could rationalize it was that some creep wanted to watch some young adults hook up on the beach and track their car to scare them. It was chilling to think about, but we were relieved that the situation hadn't escalated. One Sunday morning, about 3 weeks after the incident, I got a call from David. He screamed through the phone for me to drive to his house as soon as possible, which I did. When I got there, he was standing in his driveway with a concerned look on his face and some papers in his hand. I was confused until I realized what he was holding. They weren't papers, but rather pictures. I examined them more closely. They were pictures of me from that night on the beach. They were grainy and dimly lit, but you could clearly see Lisa and me in revealing fashion. I was disgusted. I could only imagine how Lisa would feel upon finding out. Not knowing what to do, we called the police and explained the situation. They told us that there was essentially nothing they could do, but we insisted that they at least scan the photos for prints. They eventually got back to us, saying the photos turned up nothing. Lisa was terrified that whoever sent them would try and blackmail her, and I feared the same. The experience was downright traumatizing. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that, probably because we had gotten the police involved. Lisa was never quite the same around me after what happened, and I can't blame her. I can only hope those pictures don't turn up later in my life. This took place around 2008, if my memory serves me right. My family and I had just moved to Costa Rica, and we enjoyed spending most of our time at the beach, particularly one near a lovely little river where I liked to swim. It was on this same beach that 9-year-old me found a dead body floating in the ocean. To give a little context, I had been playing on the beach, which we thought was relatively safe, so my parents were farther up. How wrong we were about it being safe. I remember seeing something floating in the water, but I wasn't sure what it was. I went to investigate and found a dead man just floating there. Part of his leg had been hacked off. It was obvious he had not drowned. The man had clearly been murdered. Around this time, we had heard about a recent string of murders that had happened both on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, where we were, and on the Pacific side. The murders had been happening every 6 months, rotating between both regions of the country, so there was reason to assume this murder had been done by the same person since it seemed to fit the timeline. As far as I can remember, the details of the murder were never disclosed in any of the local newspapers, only that the man had been a tourist from England. so there was no way for anyone who had not seen the man on the beach to know the specifics of his murder. Eventually, the whole thing blew over, and we returned to that same beach. I can't quite remember the time frame, but it was definitely within a few months of me finding the dead man that this next part happened. One day, I was swimming in the river with my mother when a very strange man popped up out of the water, startling us. He had a spear gun in hand and a snorkel mask on. He began talking to my mom, and I think we could both tell that something was just off about this guy. I wasn't really paying attention for most of their conversation, but I do remember him bringing up the recent murder on the beach. He seemed to know a great deal of details about it, which, as I previously mentioned, were not available to the public. It almost seemed as if he was trying to confess that he was the one who murdered the man without directly saying so. He also talked about how he traveled between the Caribbean and the Pacific side of Costa Rica, spending half a year in each spot. Eventually, they also got on the topic of what he did for a living. He went into great detail about how he made the masks for the movie Eyes Wide Shut and that he would make those masks, and presumably others, based on real-life human emotions. He specifically liked capturing the look of fear. We were totally taken aback by this guy and didn't really know what to do. Eventually, he just got back into the river and swam away, and thankfully we never saw him again. I do not know if this is related or not, but the weird string of murders suddenly stopped after that. Me, Leonard, and our third friend Jack were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Leonard Beach House in LBI. Jack was a year older than Leonard and me and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Jack was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon, meaning the back end of the house faces a narrow channel of water with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Leonard House. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Leonard's backyard pool. It was small but perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly, the gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joints. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Leonard turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Leonard was looking at. One of the girls asked Leonard why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Leonard shook his head. I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week. In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out, though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Jack jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like, but there was no doubt they were facing our direction. "Go inside now," said Leonard with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard, for consecutive splashes rang out from behind us. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Jack slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Leonard quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to a room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed, still nothing. Out of nowhere, Jack cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Leonard started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Jack started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Jack to handle, and he destroyed Leonard's mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once the police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Leonard's family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat, which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Leonard's father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators and likely never will. Leonard, Jack, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Leonard's family. They knew where the key was and that the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night.